I'm Denise, I'm the Scottish one.
And she's a non-fiction editor. And I'm Louise, the English one.
And she's a fiction editor. And together,
we're the Editing Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Editing Podcast. So this week we're chatting about dashes, specifically the N dash, that's N for November. How am I doing on my Whiskey Tango Foxtrots, Louise?
Yes, thank you. We're trying to keep this clean, you know. Anyway, yes, N for November. So before we get going on this, let's just remind everyone that sometimes dashes are referred to as rules. So N rules and M rules.
Yeah, they're called rules in Oxford's New Hearts rules.
Whereas the Chicago Manual of Style calls them dashes. We're going to stick with dashes so we don't confuse people when we talk about the kind of rules that describe how you should do X or Y. So let's talk first about what an N dash is.
Yeah, so the N dash is twice the length of a hyphen. And there are several uses for this bit of punctuation, some of which apply whether you're writing and editing in US or UK English, and some of which don't. So we'll make sure to cover differences in usage.
Yeah, they're definitely more prevalent in UK style writing. So the first use of N dashes is as parentheses. In other words, they set off an augmenting or explanatory word or phrase in a sentence that could stand alone without the insertion. Alternative types of punctuation that offer the same options around brackets, M dashes, that's M for Mike, commas and colons, but it really depends on what you're writing. So an example would be Rudolph, space, N dash space, that reindeer in the song, space, N dash space, had a really shiny nose.
I wish you'd sung that. Actually, I don't, because I've heard your singing voice.
I know. I gave you that little rendition of Cecilia earlier, didn't I?
Yeah, that was more than enough. I will, definitely, yeah. Now, the important thing to note here is that when N dashes are used parenthetically, they usually have spaces either side, as you heard Louise say, and that's how it's done when editing UK style.
Yes, whereas the US alternative would conventionally be parenthetical, unspaced M for Mike dashes. Just bear in mind that these are style conventions, not the law, and that means that if you're preparing a book file or a paper for a publisher or a journal, check what their preferred style is first.
Definitely, yeah. So the next place you'll see N dashes is in number spans, and it's standard in both UK and US style to have no space either side. So in non-fiction, educational, business and academic texts, for example, think about where number ranges might be found in tables and figures, in dates, page numbers, and in citations and references, and often in the main body text and headers too.
Yeah, and in fiction, it's slightly different. With prose, number spans are often written out, though again, this is a convention rather than a rule that must be adhered to. Still, you might find number ranges making their way into emails, texts and letters, or say in a report if your story is a police procedural. And of course, they're good for date ranges. And talking of fiction, there's a third use for spaced N dashes if you're writing in UK style, and that's for dialogue interrupted by narrative description. So when dialogue is broken, say by an action beat, but the speaker hasn't finished talking, that's when you can use a spaced N dash.
Right, so can you give us an example? I know it's tricky with audio, but go on, give it a go.
Yeah, so if a character called Denise was asking for another glass of gin, and the dialogue was interrupted by an action beat that mentioned her tripping over the carpet, it would go like this. Louise, pass us that bottle of Hendrix, will you? And in between, you could break up that dialogue with two spaced N dashes, and the action beat would be her foot caught on the edge of the rug and she stumbled. So I'll just try and read that out so that it is as it would look on the page. So you open the quotation mark, Louise, pass us that bottle, close quotation mark, then there's the spaced N dash, then the action beat, her foot caught on the edge of the rug and she stumbled, then there's the spaced N dash, and then we open the punctuation again of Hendrix, will you? And then close the punctuation. So both bits of dialogue are enclosed in quotation marks, but the action beat about the foot and the rug is set off by those spaced N dashes. This will be much easier to see in the transcript.
But I think we definitely get the drift of it there, that it's basically just that insertion of the action beat in the middle of the dialogue is set off with spaced N dashes. And just one point that might be worth pointing out, am I right in thinking that the second part of the dialogue continues with a lowercase
Yes.
on the O. It wouldn't be an
Yeah,
upper.
so it would be when the sentence goes of Hendrix, will you?
Mhm.
That's the second chunk of dialogue there.
Mhm.
That's lowercase, because if you took out that action beat and the two parenthetical end dashes, it would be just one sentence. It would just be running on, and so you
Yeah.
just treat it as
Yeah.
normal. Just to mention as well that, I mean, we'll cover this in another episode, but it's just because we're just using spaced end dashes here out of style. You could use closed up end dashes.
Yeah. Good. Thanks for that. I think we got there with that. I think that's okay.
Just about.
I just want to know how come I end up in your examples so often.
So I love you so much.
Ah, love you. Yeah. So another use I think is going to come up more regularly in non-fiction is the end dash in adjectival compounds. And this convention applies wherever you live.
Yes.
So the end dash comes into play when it's an issue of equal weighting. And this is important because getting it wrong could communicate a message to readers that you didn't intend or that might even offend. I'll give you an example. So take the term Asian British. If you put a hyphen between those two words, you're subordinating the word Asian because it's been used to modify British. An end dash here would indicate equal weighting between the two elements. However, there's a move now to keep these types of compounds open to accurately reflect inclusivity and diversity in our communities.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, because I think then this issue of order comes into play, because there's still ambiguity there. Like if you put the word Asian first, does that still end up modifying British, because it's people might think it's being treated attributively. I don't know.
I
It's a
don't know, because
tricky one.
you could argue that you're putting it first. You're
Yes,
emphasizing
and
the Asian.
therefore, yeah,
I mean, I think it's an interesting discussion and a
yeah,
really important discussion, and it's not one that I feel qualified to discuss in
yeah.
any depth. And I think it's one that you definitely need to look to these communities and see what their preferences
Yeah,
are.
I agree. I mean, it's something I don't feel qualified
Hmm.
to pass judgment on. And I think, and that's the thing, writers need to make sure they're representing those who they're talking about appropriately. And so it's not really for me, since
Hmm.
I'm not part of the British Asian community, to talk to people in that community and understand what their preferences are.
Yeah.
And it might well be the case that there isn't consensus. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
it's an issue. Subject specialist writers, even those who don't identify those communities, might well have nailed this. But Denise, do you just want to say anything else about those who are new to this kind of issue?
Well, I'd say, definitely check, because you could really end up disengaging a chunk of your readership if you use a dash that signifies subordination. I mean, those little pieces of punctuation are small on the page, but they can be huge in terms of identity politics.
Yeah,
So it's really important that you do your research.
absolutely. And actually, just to sort of, I mean, I kind of pushed that over to you there, just
Mhm.
thinking about sort of more sort of academic writing
Mhm.
and educational writing, but that's just as much the case in fiction as well.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
it really is.
Hmm. Hmm.
So here's another occasion where you'll be able to use the end dash, and we're back to fiction. It's in faltering speech, but more specifically where there are fumbled phrases in dialogue. So again, the end dash is a space with this style. So for UK style text, so an example would be as follows: I was going to tell you. I mean, I tried to tell you, but oh, this is so hard. So each of those places where I pause could take a spaced end dash to indicate the trips in the speaker's voice.
Okay, right. And I'm assuming that then a closed up M for Mike dash would be the US style alternative.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So our next use of the N dash is global, and that's when it's used to indicate a connection, a relationship, or an alternative. So what these are doing is replacing the words to and or to show a connection between two words that can stand alone and that together are modifying a noun.
So an example would be like this: a good author-editor relationship is essential. And the end dash is placed between the words author and editor, and it's closed up, no spaces either side.
Yeah, or you might be talking about the London-New York flight. Again, there'd be a closed-up N dash between both cities. It's the same as saying the London to New York
Mm.
flight. Now, the final way of using the N dash is to indicate omission, and this kind of thing comes into play more in fiction. So take it away, Louise.
Yeah, so in fiction, and you're more likely to see this in older books, N dashes can be used to handle profanity. The N dash isn't a universal option, very much a UK convention. And so it's used to replace every letter in the swear word except the initial letter. So you could write, I told you to F and then N dash, N dash, N dash off. And every letter except the F would be a spaced N dash.
Yeah, but I'm guessing US style is different. M for Mike's, yeah?
Yeah, though asterisks can be used globally too. There's no one way. I have a really long blog post about dashes. I can stick that in the show notes because there are more examples than that.
Great, great. So that's it on N dashes. So let's crack on with Editing Bites. This is the regular bit of the show where we each recommend a favourite resource that we think you'll find useful. So this week mine is the Conscious Style Guide, which is a website you can use. It's a terrific resource and guide on using conscious language. So looking at things like age, gender, ethnicity, all these sorts of things. It's a current guide to how best to reflect these in your writing.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Mine is a little different. It's the masterclass webinars. So an annual subscription to that is not cheap. It's currently 199 quid in the UK. Not sure what the dollar. I think it's around about the same price in dollars. Johnny, my husband, gave it to me for Christmas or my birthday or something. Anyway, it was months ago, but I only just got around to buying it. But it's fantastic. There's a ton of stuff from writers, but also screenwriters and actors too. And I think we writers and editors can learn so much from what goes on screen. So if you've got a special day coming up and someone's looking to get you something just a little bit lovely, I highly recommend this.
Well, I had my eye on that too for a long time, but actually I took the plunge and bought it for my husband for his birthday recently.
Oh, how generous of you.
So
how
generous.
Very generous of you. Has he looked at it yet?
No, but I have.
Yeah, thought so.
I just happen to have his login details, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great, there's so much to dive into. I'm really excited to have a good look round
We
it.
should maybe pick one or two favourite episodes in future and review them.
I think that'd be a great idea. Yeah, because I think there's lots there that would be relevant to our listeners, editors and writers. Yeah. So that's it for this week. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Editing Podcast. You can rate, review and subscribe to us via Apple Podcasts, Spotify or whichever platform you prefer.
And as usual, all the links we've mentioned are in the show notes, so you can grab everything there. Bye!
Bye!